well, how the things have developed since last week, it's not getting better, it's getting worse. But that tells us that we need to be more and more careful and just follow all the advices given by the scientists, authorities. I believe this is very, very essential for us to reach a normal life shorter than we expect. Coming back to steel business, the steel business, I mean, on the supply chain as a steel producers, so the rebars, let's say, or billet, we still maintain the production, but what I feel that it might last for another 3 or 4 weeks because the wave is coming. Today there's no consumption, and it will all depend on how the next weeks will develop. If it gets worse, we might also get affected and shut down for a while. But our hopes is that there was never been such a subject that the whole world with all resources working at the same time to find a solution, and I trust that the solution will be found very soon. Turkey in particular hasn't bought any scrap, I guess, for the last 3 or 4 weeks, except 2 cargoes, but this is nothing. And I haven't heard any deals are being concluded over the last 3 weeks. So the industry is just operating based on what was available before this outbreak that hit Europe.
For steel mills to function, like in some countries, steel manufacturing is considered as an essential business. So despite the country being on
in our
lockdown,
country, it's not lockdown. We don't have any lockdown order yet.
Okay.
But of course, we change all our system, running with a less number of employees, having all the precautions. On the headquarters, there's nobody. They're all based on home office, structure. But at the plant, we're still running as usual.
Okay. So, has your raw material sourcing, how is it like right now? Has it been affected by the?
Of course, it will be. I mean, the mills usually run with efficient, availability for like a month or so. So I believe, as I said, everything's going to be much more clear within coming weeks. And some of the orders on the water to arrive. So the next, say, 2 months, there will be no difficulty of having raw material, but afterwards the things will be difficult. Thank you.
Obviously, rebar is the main product in GCC. 80% of the market in GCC is rebars, and the billets and the scrap are derived demands from the rebar market. Last year, the rebar demand in the GCC has been about 17 million tons. Again, I'm talking mainly of GCC because the Middle East, of course, includes Iran, Iraq, and Yemen. But Iran is a sanctioned country, and there are issues with respect to whatever are the scenarios which arise out of that. So coronavirus scenarios also would be difficult to predict for Iran, given the other US sanctions also in place. Out of the 17 million tons of rebar demand, most of the demand of billets is supplied by the melt shops attached to the mills themselves, except for about, I would say, close to 3 million tons, which are standalone re-rolling mills and therefore would be buying. There is, of course, certain more additional demand, which is from smaller mills, which have smaller melt shops attached with them. The scrap demand basically is used for making billets. And while approximately half of the 17 million tons would come in from the DRI, the other half would come in from addition of scrap with the DRI in the electric arc furnaces and scrap being added in the induction furnaces. A lot of smaller furnaces in the GCC are induction furnaces. How do we see the coronavirus impact in this steel supply chain? We have to recognize that currently the market is in a panic mode. The governments are in a panic mode. There's curfew in Saudi Arabia it was earlier from 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. in the morning, and for Riyadh and other locations, that curfew has just got extended from 3 p.m. in the afternoon till 6 o'clock in the morning. From today, there's a curfew in Bahrain, evening curfew again, 6 to 6. There's a curfew in Kuwait. So a lot of government actions are in place to ensure social distancing. In addition to that, there is a issue between UAE and Saudi Arabia, so that all transit movements, GCC is regarded as one market, so you may have a product coming from UAE through Saudi Arabia to Bahrain or going to Kuwait. That movement has now come to a halt because all transit movements have stopped in order to curb the viral load in the society from the movement of drivers across zones. In addition to that, of course, drivers, the logistics itself, the speed of logistics has come down because drivers are being checked medically while they are crossing the borders. So that's another issue which is started hitting the supply chain. If we look at operations, steel is not regarded as, is not designated as an essential utility. So there is a fear which is not yet translated into reality that there may be a closure of the plants. We may not, the steel companies may not get curfew passes, etc., or may not be able to operate the plants if the government decides to invoke that rule. For example, in India, which has recently gone under lockdown, even the steel mills have closed down because they are not allowed to operate. That's an issue. In addition to that, there are force majeures. Because of this transit issue, road transportation becomes difficult. So the obvious alternate route then is to move by sea, especially if your quantities are large. But there are force majeures which ports are declaring. There are also issues where there's now a standard requirement that any ship which has to call a port has to get a prior approval after providing the medical data. There are some 3-4 requirements for all the crew, etc., and take a prior approval before it moves. So that obviously GCC is relatively small and ship transit times are only about 24 hours or 36 hours. So obviously that requires a different level of planning, and you cannot decide on a ship without getting the approval, prior approval. There are also rumors about ports basically not accepting any other ships. There's rumors about some ports going into a sanitization mode to sanitize themselves, and obviously during that period they will not take any fresh cargoes. So with that, all this thing which is happening, it basically leads to a scenario where customers are canceling orders because they are fishing for the bottom. So a lot of bottom fishing would start. They expect the prices would drop. So if they can cancel orders, they would cancel orders. If they can postpone, they would postpone the purchase to a time when they feel the market would be bottoming out. So that is basically going to create a scenario where the orders are obviously going to be much less. In addition to that, as you are aware, steel is basically a construction product. So in a scenario where people-to-people contact is the main cause of transmission of this disease, one can expect that construction sites will slow down. and with that, there would be again a slow uptick in the market after all this gets sorted out. So currently, we are still seeing a scenario where hopefully, with the kind of quick action which has been implemented by almost all the GCC governments, and the GCC governments have already come out with a $122 billion stimulus package for various for their economies together, and we are basically looking at a scenario where hopefully by April end or May, this panic should start coming under control. With social distancing, with all this curfews, if that can become brought under control, there is no evidence of people-to-people transmission as of now. Most of the cases have been imported into this region from mostly from Iran, and therefore, if most of them have been quarantined, the death rate has been quite low relatively. The recovery rate has been quite high. So once this panic is over, then I think customers will start coming back, and we should be able to see some recovery going forward in the either towards the end of Q2 or definitely in H2. Now that is a scenario. If unfortunately things don't work out that way, then I think we are looking for a very, very difficult scenario for the steel companies going forward.
Right now, with the curfews, what's the functioning of the steel mills right now in Bahrain? Are they functioning at all?
Yeah, so Bahrain, the major steel mill is SULB. Bahrain basically has a pellet plant of about 12 million tons, and SULB, which makes about 1.7 million tons of DRI. So as of now, we are running full pelt, and we should be okay in April. Curfew has not yet got that much of impact on the manufacturing side, on the steel mills. But if it continues for long, then yes, it would impact us towards end of Q2 or H2.
In terms of sourcing of raw materials, are you experiencing any difficulties at all? I know you mentioned about right now you're looking at ships to export large quantities, but what are the difficulties on that side of the spectrum, on the sourcing of raw materials?
No, we don't have too many issues on the sourcing of raw material because, as I said, we have our sister plant, which is a 12 million ton pellet plant. So they are adequately stocked. So that is not a problem. Availability of raw material is not a problem. And we have increased our inventory levels for some of the items, keeping in mind the possible disruption in the supply chain due to some panic somewhere.
And what are these
other
items?
than that, yeah.
What are the items that the inventory has increased for?
No, it's basically we have increased inventory of fluxes.
Okay.
Yeah, because as I said, our scenario is that this is going to be a relatively short problem. It has already been now 3 months globally, assuming that it started in January, not November last year in China. But globally, it has already seen 3 months of the pandemic. Hopefully another 3 months with the kind of information which is available globally, with the kind of global government responses. We are hopeful that in H1, this problem would get sorted out. So our scenario building is driven by that logic.
What about the supply of iron ore concentrate for your 12 million tons pelletizing plant?
There is no problem with that. It is coming. At times the ships do get delayed, but there is no major issue as such on because these are all driven by long-term contracts, and these are all on ocean movements. So
Okay. And
yeah.
is there any issue from the supply side? Just like I've read that Whale has reduced its iron ore input. So I'm just thinking like BHP, Whale, is there any issue from that side at all?
No, if when Vale or BHP reduce, the issue mostly comes in terms of increase in price rather than in terms of availability.